He was the cowboy who chose loneliness until she made him answer one question. A question colder than winter, sharper than truth, and strong enough to break the silence he wore like armor. The wind in Dust Creek never stopped talking, but it only spoke to those who had no one else left to listen. It swept through hollow barns and broken fences, carrying the smell of gun oil, rain, and ghosts. Every dusk, as the sun sank red over the canyon, Lorien Cade rode his chestnut horse through the same dusty street, alone. The horse's hooves struck the ground with the rhythm of a heartbeat trying to remember how to live. Lorien's face was carved by the sun, his eyes the color of dying coals. The townsfolk said those eyes had seen too much, lost too much, and stopped waiting for anything to change. He wasn't cruel, just empty. He passed the saloon, where music and laughter spilled out like cheap whiskey. But when he walked by, laughter always dimmed. Conversations fell quiet. And though no one ever said it, everyone felt it. That strange heaviness that followed him, like a storm still waiting to fall. Inside, a young man whispered, "That's him, the one who don't talk." An older rancher grunted. He used to, before the fire took his home. Then someone else muttered, "Before he buried her." Lorien kept walking. He always did. His cabin sat 2 miles out, on a rise of red dirt overlooking the dying pines. There was only one chair by the fire, one plate on the shelf, and one picture. Its edges burned, its face faded. He'd pour himself coffee, dark as tar, sit by the window, and stare at the empty chair across from him. Sometimes, just before sleep, he'd whisper, "You'd like the quiet now, Clara." But the quiet never liked him back. That night, the snow came early, soft at first, then fierce, wrapping the plains in white silence. Lorien stepped outside, his breath curling into mist, and saw something strange, a second trail of hoofprints beside his own. He followed them to the edge of the pines. There, in the silver hush of snowfall, sat a woman on a black mare. Her coat was torn, her hat low, but her eyes burned like a lantern in the dark. "You Lorien Cade?" she called, voice steady, not shaking like most did when they spoke his name. He nodded once, slow. She rode closer, snow crunching beneath the hooves. "Then you're the one who left my brother to die out past the Chasm trail." The wind cut between them, slicing through the silence. Lorien didn't move, didn't blink. The storm whipped at his coat as he looked at her, long and cold. "I tried to save him," he said, voice quiet as falling ash. Her stare didn't break. "Try harder next time." And before he could answer, she turned the horse and disappeared into the snow, leaving him standing there, watching her trail fade into nothing. That night, Lorien didn't sleep. He sat by the fire with the revolver laid across the table, the flames flickering against his scarred hands. The snow hissed against the window, whispering her words back to him. Try harder next time. By dawn, he knew 2 things. The storm wasn't leaving anytime soon, and neither was she. By morning, Dust Creek was buried beneath a white silence. Snow covered every roof, every trail, every sin. Lorien Cade saddled his horse just after dawn, though there was nowhere to ride. The world felt frozen in place, except for one thought that wouldn't leave him, her voice. He hadn't heard anyone say his name like that in years, not with anger, not with fear, but with truth. As he rode into town, smoke rose from the saloon chimney, twisting against the pale sky. Inside, the same old piano played, slow and tired. But at the far end of the room, behind the bar, stood the woman from last night. coat off now, sleeves rolled, wiping glasses with the kind of focus that said she wasn't running from anything. She didn't flinch when she saw him, didn't even stop wiping the glass. "Didn't think you'd come," she said. "Didn't plan to," Lorien replied, removing his hat. His voice sounded strange, like it hadn't been used in years. The barkeep glanced between them, uneasy. Everyone in Dust Creek knew when silence meant danger. Elara set the glass down, leaned on the counter. "You said you tried to save my brother. Tell me how that ended with him in a shallow grave up by the ridge." Lorien's jaw tightened. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. "Because," he said finally, "he didn't listen." "To what?" "To run." Her eyes narrowed. "You ran, didn't you?" He looked up then, really looked. And what she saw wasn't guilt, but grief. Heavy. Old. The kind that didn't fade. It just learned to breathe quieter. "There was a storm," he said, his words slow, deliberate. "We were out past the Chasm trail, driving the herd. Lightning hit the ridge. Fire tore through the dry brush faster than we could move. I told him to ride north. He went back for a calf. Lorien's voice broke, a sound dry and human. "By the time I found him, the fire had already taken him." Elara stood silent for a long time. The piano had stopped. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Finally, she said, "You buried him yourself?" He nodded. "I owed him that much." She looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, saw the truth that no one else in Dust Creek cared to see. Lorien Cade wasn't a monster, just a man haunted by a moment he couldn't undo. "Still," she said, "you could have told me, could have sent word." He looked away, voice low. "Some things are easier, left buried." But Elara Marchand wasn't the kind to leave things buried. She leaned closer, her voice a whisper sharp as ice. "Maybe that's why the dead keep following you." For the first time in years, Lorien didn't have an answer. He turned to leave, but she called after him. "You can't keep living in ghosts, Cade. They don't keep you warm." He paused at the door, his silhouette framed by falling snow, and said softly, almost to himself, "Warmth don't last out here." Then he stepped into the storm. The blizzard came like a beast. Snow tore across the plains, swallowing fences, cattle, and trails alike. Dust Creek vanished under a white storm that didn't care who you were or what you'd done. In that kind of cold, even the proud learned to kneel. Lorien Cade rode through it, coat heavy with ice, guiding his horse toward the faint light of his cabin. His breath came in ragged clouds, his fingers stiff on the reins. When he pushed open the cabin door, the wind screamed in behind him. And that's when he saw her. Elara Marchand sat by his fire, her boots steaming, his old coffee pot hissing on the flame. Her rifle leaned against the wall like it belonged there. She didn't look surprised to see him. "Wasn't planning on dying out there," she said simply. "Storm caught me halfway to the ridge. Figured you wouldn't turn me out." He closed the door, slow. The wind outside clawed at the walls like something alive. "You figured right," he said. She poured him a cup, slid it across the table. "Didn't peg you for the type to drink coffee black." He gave a faint smirk. "Ain't the type to have sugar." The silence that followed wasn't the cold kind anymore. It was warmer, alive with something unspoken. Firelight flickered across her face, softening the edges of her anger. Outside, the storm howled, but in that small cabin, time held still. After a while, she said quietly, "You ever get tired of it?" "Of what?" "This." She gestured at the empty room. "The quiet, the waiting, the pretending you don't hear the ghosts whispering your name. Lorien stared into the flames. Ghosts don't whisper, Elara. They sit, they listen. Sometimes they keep you company. Her eyes softened, but her voice didn't. No, Lorien, they keep you chained. The fire cracked, sending sparks leaping into the shadows. And then, with a calmness that felt dangerous, she asked it, the question that would carve through the silence like a blade through frost. You want a wife, Lorien Cade? Or just another winter alone? The world seemed to stop. The wind outside went still. The fire dropped low. Even the horse in the shed stopped stirring. Lorien looked at her, really looked. And for the first time in years, he didn't have a ready wall to hide behind. He wanted to tell her she didn't understand. That love cost too much out here. That warmth was a debt you paid with grief. But when he opened his mouth, only truth came out. I don't know how to be anything but alone. Her gaze didn't waver. Then learn, she said softly, because winter's long, and nobody survives it without a fire. Outside, the storm raged harder, but inside, something small and fragile, something he thought long dead, began to thaw. And though he didn't say it, Lorien Cade knew. This was the first winter he didn't want to survive alone. The storm broke 3 days later. Snow melted into dark rivers, carrying dust and secrets down the hills. Lorien Cade stepped outside for the first time in days, the light sharp against the world's new whiteness. Behind him, smoke drifted from his chimney, the quiet proof that two souls had survived another winter night together. Elara was inside, fixing a tear in her coat. Her movements were sharp, practiced, the kind of grace only hard years could teach. Lorien watched her from the porch, hat low over his eyes. For a moment, the world almost felt still, almost peaceful. Then came the sound, a single echo of hooves, slow, heavy, deliberate. He knew that sound like he knew his own heartbeat. Trouble. A rider appeared on the ridge, a tall man dressed in a long black duster, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, his horse coated in mud and frost. Around his belt hung a star badge, dull with dust. Griff Tolan, bounty man, tracker, and once Lorien's friend. Tolan reined his horse before the cabin and smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Well, I'll be damned, he said. Didn't think you'd still be breathing, Cade. Lorien's jaw set. You always did underestimate stubbornness. Tolan dismounted, his boots sinking into the slush. Heard you're keeping company now. That true? His eyes flicked toward the cabin window, where Elara's shadow shifted. She's a fine one. Didn't take you for the type to play house. Lorien stepped forward, blocking his view. Say what you came to say, Griff. Tolan's smirk faded. He pulled a folded paper from his coat, a wanted notice, edges damp from the storm. Train robbery last spring. Marshall found your old brand burned into one of the stolen saddles. Figured I'd ride down, see if the ghost of Lorien Cade still had dirt under his nails. Lorien's eyes narrowed. You know I had nothing to do with that. Maybe, but $1,000 says otherwise. Inside, Elara's hand froze over the needle. She stepped out slowly, rifle in hand. You gonna arrest him, bounty man? Tolan chuckled, tipping his hat. Not if he's willing to talk? Lorien's voice hardened. Talk about what? The Marchand boy, Tolan said, his tone turning dark. Word spreading that his death wasn't all fire and smoke. Some folks say he caught a bullet. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? The air froze. Elara's eyes locked on Lorien. What's he talking about? Lorien's silence was answer enough. Tolan grinned. Knew it. You always did have a bad habit of letting your guns speak louder than your prayers. In one swift motion, Lorien drew his revolver, not to shoot, but to remind. You best ride back the way you came, Griff. But Tolan only smiled wider. You know I don't scare easy, old friend. He turned his horse and tipped his hat to Elara. Ask him what really happened up by the chasm. Ask him why your brother's hand was burned black from holding his gun too long. Then he rode off, laughter echoing down the ridge. Elara stood in the doorway, her face pale against the snow. Lorien, she whispered. What did he mean? Lorien looked away, his voice barely a breath. He's twisting the truth. But Elara's stare burned through him. Then tell me the truth before it kills you. He didn't answer. He just turned toward the horizon, where Tolan's tracks disappeared, and said softly, Some ghosts don't whisper, Elara. They follow. That night, Lorien didn't sleep. The wind hissed through the cracks in the cabin walls, whispering Elara's words over and over. Then tell me the truth before it kills you. He sat by the fire, his revolver laid across his knees, the flames painting his face in shades of guilt. Outside, the snow had turned to sleet, hammering against the roof like 1,000 small reminders. He'd buried that memory for years. But memories, like bones, don't stay buried forever. He closed his eyes, and the night came back. The air was thick with smoke and the roar of thunder. Chasm Trail, 9 months earlier. He and Elara Marchand had been driving cattle through the canyon when lightning split the sky. The blaze started fast, dry grass catching like gunpowder, flames chasing them uphill. Move! Lorien shouted, pulling his horse beside the boys. Jules was barely 20, full of wildfire and foolish courage. Leave the herd! But Jules shook his head. We can save him. Forget the cattle. Ride! Then came the explosion. A clap of thunder, a tree bursting into flame. Their horses reared, panicked. Jules was thrown, rolling down the slope into the blaze. Lorien jumped off, boots sinking into ash, running toward him. Jules! He found him pinned beneath a burning branch. Lorien dropped to his knees, lifting with all his strength, smoke tearing through his lungs. Jules's face was black with soot, his hand clutching his revolver like it was the only thing that mattered. Lorien! Jules coughed, blood mixing with ash. Don't let me burn. Lorien froze. The fire was closing in, the heat unbearable. Jules's eyes begged him, every breath a plea. Please, don't let it be the fire. He looked at the revolver in his own hand, the same one that now sat cold and clean on his cabin table. His heart cracked. The decision came not from cruelty, but mercy. He raised the gun. His hand trembled once, and then there was silence. When the flames finally passed, he buried Jules with his own hands. No words, no prayers, just dirt over a promise. No one would ever know what really happened that night. But the West has a way of digging up what men try to hide. Lorien opened his eyes again, the firelight reflecting in the same weapon. He whispered to the empty room. I kept him from pain, Elara. That's all I ever did. From the doorway, a voice answered softly, trembling, human. I heard enough. Elara stood there, pale in the half-light, tears glinting like glass. You shot him, she said, voice shaking. Lorien rose slowly, the chair creaking beneath him. He asked me to. Her breath hitched. You think that makes it right? He looked at her, eyes hollow, voice low. No, but it made it bearable. For a moment, neither spoke. The fire snapped, sending sparks drifting between them like lost souls. Then Elara whispered, "You should have told me." He met her gaze. "And what would you have done?" She took a trembling step forward. "I would have understood." But Lorien shook his head. "No, you wouldn't have. No one ever does." She turned away, the pain cutting deep. "Maybe not, but at least you wouldn't have been alone." Then she walked out into the cold night. No coat, no words, just the wind swallowing her silhouette as the door swung shut behind her. Lorien stood in the doorway long after she vanished, the sound of sleet filling the silence. And for the first time, he wished the storm would take him too. The sun never truly rose that morning. It just bled through the clouds like a wound that wouldn't heal. The snow had turned to mud, the roads to rivers, and Dust Creek to a ghost town. Lorien Cade stood outside his cabin, staring at the empty trail where Elara had disappeared the night before. The storm was gone, but the silence it left behind was worse. His horse pawed the ground restlessly, picking up the unease that hung in the air. He hadn't eaten, hadn't slept. He'd only sat there, replaying her words. "At least you wouldn't have been alone." That was the thing about truth. It didn't set you free. It set you on fire. By noon, the sound came again. Hooves in the distance, heavy and deliberate. The same rhythm he'd hoped not to hear again. Griff Tolan. The bounty man rode in slow, a wolf's grin beneath his hat. "Well," he said, "seems the snow didn't bury all the sinners after all." Lorien didn't move. "What do you want, Griff?" Tolan swung off his horse, boots squelching in the mud. "The same thing I wanted before. Your hide, and the truth that's worth $1,000. He held up a crumpled poster. "Lorien Cade, wanted for murder." "Funny thing," Tolan went on. "Word spread fast after I left. The lady's been talking. Seems she's not too fond of what she learned." Lorien's stomach turned to stone. "Where is she?" Tolan smirked. "Rode into town at dawn. Said she wanted justice. Problem is, justice don't come free out here." He stepped closer, voice dropping low. "You could make it easy, Cade. Come quiet. Save her the heartbreak of seeing you hang." Lorien's hand brushed the revolver at his side, slow, deliberate. "I ain't dying for your paycheck." Tolan's grin widened. "Then you'll die for pride." They stared at each other, two ghosts from the same past, one made of guilt, the other of greed. Then came the click, the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. Elara stepped from behind the barn, eyes cold, rifle leveled at Tolan. Her hair was wild from the wind, her face pale but steady. "Drop it," she said. Tolan chuckled, not turning around. "So you do care?" "I said drop it." He turned slowly, his hands half raised. "You sure you want to do that, miss? Shoot me in front of your friend here? Won't change the truth." Elara's voice didn't shake. "Maybe not, but it'll make me feel better." Lorien stepped forward. "Elara, don't," she snapped, eyes never leaving Tolan. "You took my brother's pain away, Cade. I won't let anyone take yours without your say." Tolan's smirk faltered for the first time. "Well, ain't that something," he muttered, the widow defending the gunslinger. And then, without warning, he moved. A flash of steel, a spark of gunfire. The shot echoed across the canyon, scattering crows into the sky. When the smoke cleared, Tolan was on his knees, clutching his shoulder. Elara's rifle smoked in her hands, steady as stone. Lorien's gun never left its holster. Tolan stared up at them both, hatred and disbelief burning in his eyes. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "You think mercy saves you out here? It don't. It marks you. Lorien stepped closer, his shadow falling over him. Maybe, but it's the only mark worth carrying. He turned to Elara. Get his horse. We'll take him into town. She hesitated, eyes flickering with conflict. After what he tried to do? Alive, Lorien said quietly. We ain't him. For the first time, she saw something in him she hadn't before. Not just guilt, but grace. A man who'd spent years drowning in silence, now choosing to do right even when it cost him. They rode into Dust Creek side by side, dragging the wounded bounty man behind. The wind howled low through the canyon, carrying the scent of smoke and snow, and maybe, just maybe, forgiveness. The town square hadn't seen this many folks since the last hanging. Snow melted into mud under a gray sky, and the air carried the metallic scent of fear, the kind that sticks to men's throats when they talk about justice but mean blood. Lorien Cade rode into Dust Creek with Elara Marchand at his side, and Griff Tolan slumped over his horse, his arm bound with a strip of cloth. Every step of the horses echoed like a drumbeat in the silence. People stared from doorways and windows, whispering, "The ghost of Dust Creek. Killed the Marchand boy," they say. Now he's got a woman and a bounty man with him. What in God's name happened out there? At the sheriff's office, Marshal Wexler stood waiting. A lean, tired man with a jaw like granite and a conscience even harder. He looked at Lorien, then at Tolan bleeding into the snow. "Cade," Wexler said flatly, "you got a fine way of keeping quiet till hell breaks loose." Lorien dismounted. "He came for a bounty. I didn't give him one." Wexler's eyes narrowed. "That true, Griff?" Tolan spat into the mud. "He's a liar. You got the poster. It's him or me. Take your pick." Wexler took the paper from Tolan's coat, reading the faded ink. Lorien Cade, wanted for murder. Reward, $1,000. "Charges say you shot a man named Jules Marchand out by the Chasm trail," the marshal said. "That true?" Lorien didn't look away. "It is." The crowd gasped. Elara's head bowed slightly, but her eyes stayed fixed on him. "But," Lorien added, voice steady, "he asked me to." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Confusion, disbelief, anger. Wexler frowned. "You expect me to believe that?" "No," Lorien said. "I expect you to let me tell it." The marshal studied him, then nodded once. "You got 5 minutes." Lorien stepped forward, his boots sinking into the slush. He took off his hat and held it against his chest. "That night," he began, "the fire came faster than a bullet. Jules got caught under a fallen tree. He knew he wasn't getting out. Asked me not to let the fire take him. So I didn't." His voice cracked, quiet but sharp enough to cut through the air. "I buried him with his own cross. Rode back to town, but I couldn't speak it. Didn't have the words. Didn't have the right. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on." Elara stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. "He's telling the truth. I went to the ridge. I saw the grave. The fire blackened the soil. His gun was half melted." She swallowed hard. "He did what my brother begged for. No man should hang for mercy." Wexler stared at her, then at Lorien. "You saying you forgive him?" Her answer came like a whisper carried by the wind. "I'm saying I understand him." The marshal sighed, scratching the brim of his hat. "Law don't take kindly to mercy killings, Cade, but this town don't need another grave either." He turned to the crowd. "Ain't nobody here who wants to dig through that fire again, do they?" One by one, the townsfolk shook their heads. A few looked away. Some nodded, grim-faced. The West had its own kind of justice. Not clean, but true. Finally, Wexler said, You're free to go, Cade, but don't give me reason to regret it. Tolan cursed under his breath. You let him walk? You're a fool, Marshal. Wexler shot him a glare colder than the mountain peaks. And you're lucky you're walking at all, Tolan. Get out of my town before I decide to even the odds. Tolan's glare found Lorien. This ain't over, he hissed. Mercy never saves a man. It only delays the bullet. Lorien watched him ride off into the gray distance, a shadow swallowed by the horizon. Elara stood beside him, silent. When the crowd began to scatter, she finally said, You could have lied. He looked at her, tired eyes soft for the first time. Lying never did me much good. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of thawing earth and pine. Spring was coming, slow, but coming. She looked up at him, the faintest trace of a smile ghosting across her lips. So what happens now? He glanced toward the hills beyond Dust Creek, the endless open where the world began again. Now, he said quietly, we ride. By dusk, the sky over Dust Creek burned red. The kind of red that makes men reach for their guns without knowing why. The wind carried the scent of rain and cordite, whispering through the canyon like a promise. Lorien Cade stood by the edge of town, the last light of day washing his face in copper and gold. The storm clouds gathered on the horizon, thick and dark as sin. He could feel it in his bones, the kind of quiet that always comes before blood. Behind him, the saloon doors creaked. Elara stepped out, her coat drawn tight against the wind. You can feel it too, can't you? She said. He nodded. He's coming. Griff Tolan, the bounty man who lived for coin and vengeance, the man who couldn't let go of the past any more than Lorien could. He'd ridden out that morning, bleeding and bitter, but some men don't ride away. They circle back. Elara stepped closer. You don't have to do this, Lorien. He turned to her, voice low. Some debts don't go unpaid. She searched his eyes, the kind of look that begs a man to stay alive. And if you kill him, then maybe the ghosts finally stop following me. A gust of wind swept through, carrying the faint echo of hooves. Lorien's hand fell to his revolver. He could hear it now. One horse, steady, relentless, heading straight for town. The people of Dust Creek began to scatter. Doors slammed, curtains closed. Only the two of them remained in the street, the cowboy and the woman who'd made him face his truth. The hooves grew louder. The wind howled. Then he appeared. Griff Tolan, black coat flaring behind him like a shadow cut loose from hell. He reined in his horse, dust swirling around him. You should have stayed dead, Cade, he called out. Guess I was waiting on you, Lorien answered. Tolan grinned, dismounting. You think the Marshal's word means anything? You think mercy saves you? He drew his gun, spinning it once, smooth as a snake's strike. I told you, mercy just delays the bullet. Lorien's voice was calm. Maybe, but it still buys a man a sunrise. For a long breath, nothing moved. The sky rumbled. The air hung thick with heat and waiting. Then, the world snapped. A flash, a crack, 2 gunshots, one after, the other too fast to separate. The echo rolled down the canyon like thunder. Then came the silence. Dust swirled, crows scattered. Tolan stumbled back, eyes wide, clutching his chest. He looked down, disbelief carved across his face. You, he gasped. You always were faster. Lorien stood steady, gun smoking in his hand. And you always talked too long. Tolan dropped to his knees, blood soaking into the red dust. The rain began to fall, soft, slow, like the sky was tired of watching men destroy themselves. Lorien holstered his weapon, breathing hard. The weight of years seemed to fall from him all at once. Not gone, but lighter somehow. Elara ran to him, her hands trembling. "You're hit," she whispered. He glanced down, a graze along his arm. "Nothing I ain't felt before." She pressed her forehead to his chest, the rain mixing with her tears. "You didn't have to do this." He looked down at her, voice soft as the wind. "I did. Because he wasn't just after me, Elara. He was after the part of me that wanted to live." For a moment, they stood there in the falling rain. Two souls who'd been broken by fire and winter, now washed clean by the storm. The marshal came running up the street, rifle in hand. "It's over," he said, looking at Tolan's body. "Finally over." Lorien shook his head. "Not over, just finished." The marshal nodded slowly, understanding. "You leaving?" Lorien looked toward the horizon, where the rain met the light. "Yeah, there's nothing left for me to haunt here." He turned to Elara. "You coming?" She hesitated, then smiled faintly. That quiet, knowing kind of smile that doesn't need words. Always. Together, they walked toward the setting sun, the kind of ending only the West could write. Not perfect, not peaceful, but real. Behind them, the town of Dust Creek watched in silence as two shadows disappeared into the red horizon. One legend dying, another being born. The rain had stopped by morning. The sky stretched wide and pale, streaked with light like a scar trying to heal. Dust Creek lay quiet behind them, a town that had seen too much, now pretending it hadn't. Lorien Cade rode slow beside Elara, their horses' hooves soft against the damp earth. The smell of wet sage filled the air, and somewhere in the distance, a river whispered through the canyon. For the first time in years, Lorien wasn't thinking about the past. He was thinking about the road. The way it twisted, open and endless. The way it didn't care who you were or what you'd done. Elara glanced at him from beneath her hat brim. "You ever been east?" she asked. He shook his head. "Never saw much point. Folks say there's green land out there. Rain that don't turn to mud. Rivers you can drink from without tasting dust." "Sounds peaceful," she said softly. "Peaceful's not always kind," he answered. "Sometimes it just gives you too much time to think." She smiled faintly. "Then I guess we'll learn to think together." For miles, they rode without speaking. And in that silence, something gentle began to grow. Not love, not yet, but the space where love might one day live. The wind softened, brushing through the grass like a sigh. The world didn't feel so heavy anymore. When they reached the ridge above the valley, Lorien stopped. Below them, the land spread out in a wash of gold and green, the kind of sight men write songs about but never truly describe. Elara followed his gaze. "Beautiful," she said. He nodded. "Never thought I'd see it again." She turned to him. "You talk like a man who's done living." He smiled. Small, tired, but real. "No, I talk like a man who finally knows how." They made camp by the river that night. The firelight danced across their faces, warm and forgiving. Lorien leaned back against his saddle, eyes half closed, listening to the crackle of the flames and the rhythm of the water. Elara sat across from him, her voice low. "When I first came to Dust Creek, I wanted to kill you. I know. But when I saw how you carried it, the guilt, the loneliness, I realized you already were." Lorien didn't answer. He didn't need to. She reached across the fire, her hand brushing his. Soft, unsure, but brave. "You don't have to keep dying for it, Lorien. You did what he asked. You gave him mercy. Maybe now it's time to give yourself the same. For a long moment, neither moved. The fire popped. The night hummed. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried, not mourning, but singing. Lorien looked at her hand resting against his and said quietly, "I don't know if I can." Elara smiled, the kind of smile that carries both pain and hope. "Then I'll remind you until you do." The river whispered on. The wind turned warm, and under that wide, endless sky, two souls who'd walked through fire finally found a place to rest. Dawn came soft and gold, spilling across the valley like a promise. Mist clung to the river, wrapping the world in a hush so deep it felt sacred. Lorien Cade stirred by the dying fire, the warmth still clinging to the air where Elara had slept beside him. For a long while, he just watched the sky turn from gray to amber, the same sky that had once watched him bury his guilt, his grief, his heart. Now it looked new, like it had forgiven him. Elara emerged from the brush, hair loose, carrying a tin of water from the river. "Morning," she said gently. "Morning," he replied, voice rough with sleep. She poured the water into the pot, smiling faintly. "You always this quiet?" He gave a soft laugh, the kind of sound that startled even him. "Old habits." "Well," she said, stirring the pot, "maybe it's time to learn some new ones." The sun crept higher, brushing the grass with light. Birds began to stir in the distance. It was the kind of morning that made even broken things want to heal. After breakfast, they packed their gear and mounted up. The trail stretched ahead, long, winding, endless. At the crest of the hill, Elara slowed her horse and looked back toward the fading line of Dust Creek. "Hard to believe we survived that place," she murmured. Lorien followed her gaze. "Maybe we didn't," he said quietly. "Maybe we just started over." She smiled. "That's close enough to living for me." They rode for miles in easy silence, the wind at their backs. Somewhere along the way, she began to hum. Low, haunting, beautiful. It wasn't a song Lorien recognized, but it sounded like home. When they reached the fork in the trail, she stopped. Ahead, two paths split, one leading east toward Greenlands, the other south, back toward the canyons and endless open sky. She turned to him. "Which way?" He hesitated. Once, that question would have frozen him. A man chained to his ghosts, unable to choose anything but solitude. But not anymore. He looked at her, the woman who'd walked through fire to understand him, who'd asked the one question he'd never been brave enough to ask himself. Her words echoed again in his memory. "You want a wife, Lorien Cade? Or just another winter alone?" He took a deep breath, the wind cool against his face, and smiled. A real, quiet, human smile. "This time," he said, "I think I'll take the fire." Elara's lips curved into a soft grin. "Then let's ride." They turned east toward the light. The wind rose behind them, carrying the sound of hooves fading into the dawn. And as the horizon swallowed them whole, Dust Creek became what it was always meant to be, just another story whispered by the wind. A story about a cowboy who once chose loneliness. Until she made him answer one question,